All right, this is going to have to go in a nice, orderly way in order for us to get through it. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have about 17 minutes for each breakout group to report out. Now, what you're going to see, don't expect these slides to be picture-perfect pretty in terms of PowerPoint and everything else. These were done, this is the initial report out, and I can't believe how good our volunteers were in putting all this together. And Chuck over there, take a bow for managing to consolidate the files again. So, and since this is unrehearsed, I don't know what I'm going to see when I hit this first clicker. So, I'm not sure I want to. But the first, I'm probably just going to turn it over to the first moderator, J.J. Greenway, and let him push the button and see what happens, all right? So, J.J., would you like to report out on the safety panel?
I guess I'm going to have to, Bob. I'm not even sure I'm first. I just picked a pretty girl and sat down next to her, so some will say that's usually what I do, but I don't know who's up first. It looks like, oh, it's got safety at the bottom. In the interest of changing flight training to improve the fatality rate, and we're not going regulatory, Bob. We discussed the possibility of an advisory circular that outlined best practices for flight instructors. There are other advisory circulars such as, and the one that, and by the way, Mel was in our group, and I thought it was a very good experience for us to sit with Mel and for Mel to sit with us and see what we talk about in these things for 3 hours at a time. I will commend him for staying there the whole time. But there's such a wide range of flight instruction available out there. Under Part 141, it tends to be a little more regimented. Under Part 61, obviously, it's kind of all over the place. But although advisory circulars are just that, they're advisory in nature, there are some advisory circulars like AC 6183F, the conduct of the Flight Instructor Refresher Clinic, that are de facto, well, I won't say regulatory, but you have to follow that if you're going to have a FERC. So a best practices advisory circular that would basically be how flight instructors should conduct flight training and how they should conduct themselves in order just to raise the standard of performance of flight instructors. We are very general here. We didn't go specific, and we didn't pile things on Mel's desk. He'll be happy that for us. So industry would make the advise on the advisory circular, if you will, or make up the advisory circular. And of course, it has to have the final stamp of the FAA when it's all signed off. We gave ourselves a year for this, and still to be fleshed out is exactly who the industry is, and we know who the FAA is. The second one we came up with was incentive programs, and there was a little bit of bloodshed and throwing things over this one. We have an incentive program out there. It's called the Wings program, but it's preaches to the choir mostly. Like I mentioned yesterday, we find out that the people that get involved in accidents are not the people that actually came and ate the dog food that the dog food company produced. So we need to figure out a way. We decided to get more pilots involved in safety education. So maybe a fix of the Wings program. It was fixed once, but it's still not drawing enough people in. But just some way to incentivize pilots to obtain more safety education. By the way, we did have 100% consensus on all of these hard-fought 5 items that we came up with. Obviously, the point of safety education is to raise the performance standards for pilots and try to get out there and get pilots in, like I said, who don't normally participate. Once again, this is going to require FAA and industry cooperation. That's no surprise at all. Some of us have already been involved in programs to improve the Wings program over the last couple of years, and that probably will be the mainstay of our incentive program, but we're open to other ideas as well on this. Certificate-specific flight reviews, and Tom Glista pointed out to us that there is a loose spot in FAR 6156, and if you read it verbatim, it does require that flight instructors, when they give a flight review, that they give that flight review to the standard of the certificate that that pilot currently holds. This does not require a regulatory change. but it does require an interpretation, a strict interpretation of 6156. If it's often been said that if pilots flew to at least private pilot practical test standards, that there would be no accidents other than maybe mechanical accidents. So if flight instructors were willing to sign off when they conducted a flight review, that they conducted that flight review to the private pilot practical test standards, commercial pilot or ATP practical test standards as well, just like the instrument rating currently requires the sign-off that it was conducted in accordance with the instrument rating practical test standards, then we feel that that would bring an improved level of safety. This is primarily FAA. The discussion came up too, and I guess we'll hit it in a further slide, about holding flight instructors in a flight review to the level of their flight instruction certificate as well. We didn't nail that one down completely. We call this one the dirty little secret of flight training. If you've instructed long, you will come across a student who is incapable of learning to fly. And I know there's a book out there on the market that came out in the 60s or 70s called Anyone Can Fly. And at first when I read that book, I thought maybe there was something to it, but after several decades in the right seat trying to teach people to fly, I think I would write another book called Not Everyone Can Fly, or Some People Can Fly. But most of us that have been instructing long have come across a student that just flat out can't learn to fly. And Jennifer, this doesn't run contrary to any of the work that we're doing as far as trying to get students to learn to fly. But it's a negative blow to the industry when we have a student that goes out there and hurts themselves, causes an accident. I know my student that's been at it the longest soloed back during the Nixon administration and has 234 hours now, and he gets a sign-off every 90 days. I don't know if he's incapable or just doesn't want to, but there are people out there who, after 100 hours, still haven't soloed. And I know it's nice to have their business maybe and keep them in the flight school, but these people can cause a negative impact on general aviation that we really don't need. So we discussed the creation of not an advisory circular, but articles, or at least just letting this secret out. And like I said, most of us have instructed long have had someone that fits this category, and it's something that, and when we were in the room talking about it, it struck me that I'd never really talked about it with more than one other person at a time. So it's something I think that we need to acknowledge, that not everyone can fly. So it doesn't really require a philosophical change, but we decided that some guidance, maybe it could be in the form of an advisory circular, or maybe just the next revision to the Flight Instructor's Handbook, just provide some guidance so that this is something that we can talk about and can bring up before students. We did have a 100% consensus on that as well. This is going to take me way less than 17 minutes, Bob. This is good. We realize that there are a lot of additional statistics out there. An NTSB report for a fatal accident or just the FAA report for a non-fatal accident really holds very little information if we really want to dig into the accident causes. We had two people from the insurance industry in our group, and we all know that the insurance companies hold far more information than is available to us that we get even with a FOIA request after an accident. We're interested in things like how many Cessna 182s have bent firewalls, because it tends to be an airplane that gets heavy in the flare. All those things that the insurance industry has, we'd like to figure out a way, at least for the top 5 or 10 accident causes, we'd like to try to figure out a way to get more of that statistical information out there to use, and not just so we can look and see what went wrong, but in a preventative measure in order to look ahead and see where accident causes for accidents might be. We did decide that we would have to incentivize the insurance companies to release de-identified information, and I know Jim at Avemco has been very generous about sharing information that Avemco has in the furtherance of safety issues. And the incentive could be that if we did have a central clearinghouse for de-identified information, other insurance companies could benefit from some of their competitors' information as well, as far as additional information that would be helpful in predicting where accidents are. Obviously, this is an industry and an FAA cooperative effort as well, and we left ourselves a year for collection of this data. That's our 5th one.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you to everyone who participated in our group, which was focused on growing general aviation. To start off with, all of our recommendations pertain to a life cycle, which I'll wrap up with. The first step in the life cycle of a customer, a student pilot, who eventually becomes a pilot and hopefully stays a pilot. It was the focus of our actions. So the first one has to do with surrounding GA awareness. We felt that as an industry we need to reach beyond our borders, and everybody in the room felt very strongly about that. And there have been a number of great outreach programs over the years, Be a Pilot and other efforts that have tried to address this, but we needed to work on some focus and not doing the same old thing again, but to refine that. And in the words, I think Dick Koenig said it pretty well, where we are shooting an arrow at the right target as opposed to maybe a more shotgun type approach. So our first step focused on a delivery method that would communicate the value of the GA experience. We do a lot of advertising, as different members of the industry, to reach out to people who are prospective pilots, and the first question that they ask is, what's it going to cost me? And we don't have a very good answer to what that value is. We need to do a better job of communicating that value. So in order to do that, we focused on creating a presentation that would help the average one of us to communicate that value. A gentleman from the state of South Carolina, and I'm sorry that I'm blanking your name at this point, but he talked about having a state ambassador program, and we kind of dovetailed these recommendations together that we could work to identify at least one person within each state to start off with as the delivery method for this presentation. And then we could reach out to the FAST team, to NASEO, to other industry groups, and deliver the presentation. So the action item is to develop a presentation that we could distribute. The why, because we are not communicating the value of the GA experience adequately, because we're running up against that cost question, and we can get past that cost question if we're communicating that value. We decided that we have a really good partner in AOPA to create that presentation, that initial presentation, and Jennifer Storm raised her hand as being able to spearhead that. They have committed to starting discussion immediately. Because of budget cycles, we gave ourselves, I think, a 12-month time frame for that. In target of completion in fall of 2012, so that would be available and disseminated out to a number of stakeholders. After GA awareness, the second step in the life cycle process is student pilot recruitment. Once we've communicated out the value of the GA experience, then we need to get somebody in the front door of our flight school. In order to do that, we need to effectively talk to that person once they're inside our front door. So our focus wasn't necessarily on bringing them in the front door, but once they were there, making that first contact, making that initial sell. And we had a good lively discussion about the complete lack of customer service skills in your average flight instructor. This is something that I know we at Cessna have been trying to teach for the past 40 years. And it remains something that is a continuous challenge because of the turnover amongst flight instructors, because a lot of the time they or whoever the front desk person is not sales trained, doesn't have that kind of skill set. We have been developing in different areas basic customer service contact materials, and it was proposed that we would create a repository of those materials that could be used widely by anyone in the industry. And to be able to share that information, at least, speaking for Cessna, we're ready to share that information because of the theory that, the rising tide lifts all boats. We haven't been able to successfully teach everybody that on our own, just by our own method, so we want to share this. We thought that would take the formation of a contact form, a first contact form, other training materials to teach those sales 101 skills to flight instructors, to customer service representatives, to anybody that the flight school management felt would be answering the phone, talking to a person when they walked in the door, so that they would be able to effectively convert that interest into a student pilot. Action on this is going to be taken by the Flight School Association of North America. They have a website launch that's coming together that would be effectively shelter this repository of information. And as other stakeholders in the industry, we've committed to providing materials to FASANA to provide into that repository. Time frame on this, they're getting ready for a website launch, but we would give, through the first quarter, I think it says, first quarter of 2012, to start getting materials up there. That would be a first step in the process. Following on to that would be additional training that we would help put together and help FASANA deliver. The next step in the life cycle is student pilot retention. And again, our discussion focused back on the flight instructor and how do we develop those skills amongst our flight instructor cadre. Now, there was some mention of bringing things into the PTS, but I don't think we have to go there. We decided that, because an instructor or anybody seeking out a pilot certificate, they're going to follow what's in the syllabus, what is required of them by a training course to learn. And there is a lack of any kind of human element training that is in our current courseware for flight instructors. We touch upon it in the context of how people learn. We touch upon it in the context of, understanding, things from a teaching perspective, but we don't talk about how you help a customer identify their reasons for learning to fly, how they want to achieve their goals, how you can make it fun for them along the way, how you can help them work through any plateaus or other outside issues that they might have that are competing with their need to learn to fly. So as a call to action, we determined that we wanted to work with course providers to incorporate those tasks into the syllabus as part of the overall, whether you put it into an area that's addressing professionalism, or whether you could do it a number of different ways, and we want to leave that up to the course provider to do that. But again, I was speaking again for us, and John and Martha, I've kind of committed us, so sorry. But I felt you would be on board. Okay, great. I got a thumbs up. But also, put out a call to action to the other courseware providers in the industry to incorporate this into CFI training. I know that we have successfully incorporated some things that are not necessarily on the practical test standards that are in our syllabus that we felt were critical to incorporate. But if we're going to expect this of our instructors, we need to teach it to them from the beginning and do it in a systematic way. And we say within 12 months. We'll see. Everybody's publication cycle is different and resources, but we felt that we could at least start the discussion. Number 4, in the cycle is to retain pilots once they've achieved their certificates. And we were very fortunate because we're running desperately out of time at this point because we spent so much good quality time on the first three. But fortunately, one of the items that had sifted up through the brainstorming was mentoring. And that mentoring can take three different pathways, I guess. There's mentoring of the pilot, there's mentoring of the instructor, and there's mentoring of the school, the flight training organization. SAFE has been working on a flight instructor mentoring program. AOPA has been working, and has had Project Pilot, which is going through a major revision right now. And FASANA plans mentoring in part in the form of their accreditation recommendations. Since we had industry stakeholders that were already working on those items, we felt that those works in progress pretty much adequately captured what we wanted to achieve with this fourth recommendation. So we'll kind of leave it at that. We're giving everybody a nice long time frame because we're a little bit maybe vague on how we would support those, but we did commit within our group to communicating those mentoring programs, whether it's AOPA's mentoring program, SAFE's, or FASANA's, through all of our channels. And communicating that those things are there is, as we well know, communication is the foundation before you can get anything done. And our fifth recommendation is an acknowledgement, and well, not really an acknowledgement, but an identification of just some very basic, straightforward. I think Mark Lee, who is in our group, crystallized this very well, as did David Moser from Diamond, that we've been in the business of training, and we're very good at training, but we haven't effectively identified as a group what the customer life cycle is. And from awareness to recruitment to student retention to pilot retention, that's a life cycle, and it flows back into itself. Because if you're mentoring effectively, then you have people who are out there that are promoting and increasing general aviation awareness, and the life cycle continues. So our fifth recommendation is very broad and is kind of a charge for everybody. But if we identify this life cycle, then we can make our approach to growing the pilot population a holistic thing rather than a bunch of scattered efforts. So again, AOPA stepped up to help us formulate what that is, put together the communication around it, and get that out so that everybody can understand what that life cycle is and what each of, for example, our recommendations had to play into that life cycle and help us grow rather than shrink. So that concludes our recommendations for the growth panel.
Okay, let's see what we got here. All right, this is going to be a little tight, but I think I can read it. Okay, the recommendation here that we're focusing in on, and this is interesting because I see a synergy already with a couple of the other groups here, both safety and growth. We were looking at the whole delivery of the safety and doctrine process, how doctrine gets created and distributed to the people participating in it. And one of the first things that popped up is, what about the customer? What about the person at the receiving end of the training? We all decided, you know what, we need to tell the story straight to the person that's walking in the door, that's the reason why we're all here. And I think that with regard to safety and doctrine, especially doctrine, we need to share the doctrine with the student that we're going to give to everybody else. And that means, among other things, that we expect lifelong learning from the student. We expect a safety culture to be present, and we're going to be forthright about the safety issues. That is to say, you're about to engage in a risky business where you can manage the risk or not for a successful outcome. I mean, and again, it's what was heard yesterday about addressing the big lie. And the idea is to be forthright with the student and create that safety culture right up front, and in fact put it in official guidance and documents that's directed at the student. Now, there was a student pilot guide at one time, and there's still one present, but it's evolved over the years. And mostly it just dealt with FAA regulatory requirements. We feel that it should include consumer issues and safety issues. And that is to say, we should tell how to find a flight school and everything else, as well as the minimum requirements, but we really need to tell folks that this whole process is going to be something they should go into very seriously, because flying can be dangerous, and it's within your power to manage those risks. We will teach you how to do that, and we will be able to create an environment where you can learn and continue to learn after you're certificated. So we're creating the image within the customer that this is a lifelong process and it doesn't end when they get their certificate. Now, I asked one member of the audience, I said, is this going to fly with the people who make and build airplanes and sell airplanes and everything else? And I got the nod. So the fact is, by being forthright and honest about it up front and giving people the power, empowering them to control their safety record. Now, we feel that the same doctrine needs to be across the board, and I'll get to that in a minute. All right, now this has to be a cooperative effort. I mean, who does this is going to be very important. Now, who publishes it is less important. But I feel that there also needs to be an FA version of this, and so did everybody in the group. That is to say, maybe the student pilot guide gets republished with this information. It would include regulatory requirements, consumer information, and the whole thing about the safety culture. But I cover every aspect of it. And if anyone in my group feels I've missed an important point, leap up, please, and help me out here. But I think that's where we're looking at on this one. Okay, next one. Basically, the problem is when we issue a new piece of information, suppose a new piece of doctrine, we fail to simultaneously synchronize it with the knowledge test, the practical test standards, flight instructor standardization, examiner standardization, and not to be forgotten, what about FA inspector and indoctrination. So the fact is, whenever we move forward with new doctrine, it needs to be synchronized across the board so that all the people it's intended to get the same message simultaneously. That's the drift of all this. And I was really hammering on people, so we got to get all the details in here and everything else, but maybe from the point of view of briefing it, I should have gone with, fewer words are better. Like I said, it's not pretty the way it's presented, but it's all there. So the idea is, this is probably an FAA action, but I think you can see that industry can certainly propose things that would be included in this synchronization effort, like creating the test questions. Allow industry to be part of the development process and in fact lead it. But the FAA has got to be the repository and the integrator, because they control the doctrine documents, the test standards, and everything else. So actually we crossed over into the boundaries of the standards group here a little bit, but I think the drift of this here is that the FAA needs to do a better job of managing this guidance and doctrine process so that it's all integrated. Everybody who's a part of the process needs to get the same information simultaneously. Okay, third one. Okay, we thought with regard to specific doctrine that a huge gap is teaching instructors how to do risk management. And I would say across the board there is an almost universal lack of ability to do this. Either they're unaware of it, or they don't know how to teach it because the guidance hasn't been provided, or they may even be teaching faulty risk management guidance. So the fact is, we think that the CFI is crucial. Now you notice we're working our way up the food chain here. We're starting with the customer in terms of the safety culture and working our way up the food chain, but we feel the instructor is going to be critical. Again, our apologies to the instruction group, but we felt like we had to cross over the boundaries here and address this issue, because flight instructor doctrine is lacking in some key material here in terms of how to teach risk management. And that theme has crossed over here, that the FAA's put out some great guidance in the last couple of years with industry's help, but not all of it is totally integrated yet. Okay. Now, with regard to how this gets done, I mean, almost all of this is going to be a joint industry FA effort. And we all were worried about, you know, when should all this get done? Now, the fact is, there are some specific documents that need to be revised that are in there, either that got a very cursory review when they were recently revised, or they haven't been revised at all. So everybody said, well, let's just have it all done by September 30th. And, you know, which year? You know, the key thing is here, the FAA will probably take this all very seriously, but they have limited resources, and they're going to want to know the priorities for this. What should we do first? You know, so the fact is, we're going to have to work collectively as a group to say which guidance material needs the most updating. Now, we have a list. We developed a list. Let's see if that's on another slide. Nope, we better go back to that. We had a list. The Flight Training Handbook, for example, was revised. It was done earlier in the cycle before all the recent emphasis on higher order pilot skills. That needs to be revised. A couple of the other handbooks, like risk management, left out some key issues like how to do risk mitigation. So the fact is, there has to be a group that looks at this whole process, and the FAA is going to have to take the lead in saying how you're going to organize the industry around this. You might decide that the JSC, the Joint Safety Committee, is a proper group to work this issue, or you might set up an ad hoc group to do it. But the key thing is how it gets coordinated is really crucial, because nobody has enough resources to do all this at once, and sequencing it in the proper order is critical. Okay, FITS. Now, unlike the first couple I gave you, we did not have a consensus on this, and I'll describe what's going on. Basically, the FITS tenets, we call them, like higher order learning, higher order pilot skills like risk management, scenario-based training. Everybody agreed that all of those tenets need to be incorporated within our training doctrine across the board. What we had a significant disagreement is on whether FITS, the program, should continue. One of the issues is that, in the words of one of the participants, FITS is too heavily bureaucratized. That is to say, the approval or acceptance process out in the field has broken down. The inspectors don't have time to get to this activity, and it's way down their priority list, and even when they get to it, the guidance in the handbook, they look at it and say, I still don't know how to do it. And why am I doing it anyway? So the fact is that, and this has actually led to perverse consequences, that whereas some insurance companies are asking that if a training course is used, it should be FITS accepted. And if they can't get that acceptance, then we're defeating the purpose of the program. So some people said that until there's a better way to get all of these skills into all the training programs, we need to retain FITS long enough as a process to aid in this transition. But everybody agreed that at some point it should be sunsetted, because once all this gets into the training doctrine, into the curricula, into the standards, we no longer need it. That much everybody agrees on. But there is a difference of opinion as to whether it should be, eliminated, or and when. Okay, the CFI renewal process. Again, we're crossing over the boundaries here. I think you're going to hear that theme here. Alternative methods, and also with regard to both active and inactive CFIs. What exactly do we do here with these 90,000 flight instructors? The fact is, a lot of them go to the 16 hours, put toothpicks between their eyelids, and suffer through it and learn nothing. A lot of people go to their FSDO if they're a chief instructor, and their buddy in the FSDO will renew them based on what used to be called acquaintance, but we thought that was a dirty word in the FA. It sounded like something under the table, so we replaced it with duties and responsibilities. Like if you look at the rule, any airline captain can come in who holds a CFI and automatically get renewed, even though they haven't instructed maybe ever. So the fact is, we want all 90,000 CFIs to be singing off the same sheet, because you never know when they're going to go active again and pop out of nowhere and start instructing. And we felt like somehow the information needs to be standardized, and it needs to be applicable to everybody, and the menu, that is the required number of hours, needs to be changed constantly so that the mix of training covers all of the issues that are current. How to teach risk management. Again, maybe there should be a module and one of those 16 hours should be devoted to how to teach risk management. So again, getting the right menu of course subject matter, making sure it changes regularly to reflect trends and safety trends, and making sure that everybody gets it who has the privilege. That is to say, you may, even if you're inactive, if you want to keep that certificate, not only will you have to do a FERC, you might have to complete a test, a standardized, maybe it's a self-learning module, maybe it's some other kind of thing, but the idea is to tighten it up a little bit. Now, I know, to Mel Cintron's credit, recently he's looked at the FERC process and he's invited industry participation. And I think this is something we need to follow up on. I think it's high on the FAA's plate, and I think that in terms of the instructor community, that's SAFE and NAFI and others, we need to be on board with this and to work with the FAA on this process.
We've gone around and discussed so much about the written tests and the written test standards, and then also practical tests and practical test standards. But the problem comes in the fact that we really don't have identified what it is we want to test. So if we can identify the items, the test base that we want to be able to test, the knowledge that we need them to have, and then test that base. Now we have a way to, on top of that, build practical test standards for the oral part of the practical test standard, and we are sure that we're covering the material. What's happening now is we change this question, we change that question, we add this question, but we don't have really an integrated method of addressing the topics that need to be learned. So we would, in this case, use what was new to me, an ASTM model, and this helps us arrange this and organize this, but we need industry participation to identify this, and then eventually to go work with AFS 600 and 800 to identify these topics and then build those the test questions on top of that. Once we have that knowledge base also, we can be a little more creative perhaps on how the questions are built, what form they take, how they're actually written, the different choices that you have for the answer. All of that will come out of the fact that we've identified what has to be tested, what has to have the knowledge. Definitely a PTS change, but a PTS change committee that will be in like a constant communication with AFS 600, kind of a continuous loop where information is coming from them to us, and we industry making recommendations. They're saying, well, we think we want to do this. We would take a look at it and help them, and then we're getting a better look at what they're going to produce in the way of practical tests. We definitely have to align the practical test standards with the current things that are happening in the world and in our industry. We have mentioned in some of the presentations about maneuver-based versus scenario-based, and we've talked a lot about that, but maybe there are maneuvers that are in those practical test standards right now that don't represent what we need to be doing or we do in the world. So we could get into long discussions, and we had those discussions in our group. Maybe 8-ton pylons is not the maneuver that we want, but maybe there's another maneuver out there that would better represent what the pilot has to do. So we have to adjust that practical test standards. This was quite a discussion as well. One way we can help meet standards is to use simulation more. But we have a couple of problems at the moment, and one is that our guidance that we have about the different methods of simulation have not kept up with where we are in simulation. The AATDs, the FTDs, I see some heads shaking there. I recently went to a flight school because I wanted to do some approaches to get my IPC. And the instructor told me one thing, and the letter on the simulator told me something else, and I tried to read the regulation, and I didn't get very far with that. It got very confusing. So that whole thing We have to clarify that. The instructors have to know how to use the simulator. They have to know how to log the simulator time. The student needs to understand the importance of the simulator. I'm using that generically. And they have to be comfortable doing those things. But also me, the consumer, when I walk in that door, I need to understand what that simulator can and can't do. It won't do me any good to do an IPC if I find out after I've spent the money on the simulator that it didn't count. But yet nobody could give me a definite, clear-cut answer. AATDs in particular, one of the members of the group brought up is really a problem. And we talked about 61, let's see, I had some references here but that are not added here, but we'll include those in our recommendations. We're asking also and recommending that we come up with something and some kind of guidance. Perhaps you mentioned best practices, maybe a document along that line on how to do a flight evaluation. Now this can be to help the DPE, but we also have a lot of instructors that are giving flight evaluations, and they really don't know how to do that. How do you structure it? How do you test what's appropriate, what's not appropriate? We can include in that testing and that guidance for testing on how to use scenario-based testing and how to use simulation in your testing. I know a lot of pilot examiners that I've met don't really want to go to the scenario because it's more work for them. They haven't done it before. They don't really see a good way to do it. It's not comfortable. All of those things, we need to kind of close the gap on that so that the pilot examiner and all the other people that are doing any kind of evaluations, and I would include pre-solo evaluations in this, they need to know how to do that and what they're looking for and what resources they have, and make people and instructors better at doing those things. And here's the common theme that some people already took my thunder. The ongoing, and I say independent, but the ongoing instructor that's maybe not associated with a school, a 141 where they get regular checks, or a 142, but really the person that's out there at the local airport that's instructing but not doing very much or doing none at all. What do we do with those folks? And you guys have already really addressed that. But we went round and round. This was, I had a continuous loop and I had an infinite loop, and this was the infinite loop. We went through many different things here. Change the ACs, make it self-policing, have FSDO action, student questionnaire for feedback on the instructors, tie it to a flight review so that the instructor had to demonstrate some instructional competency on a flight review, but nothing really seemed to fit. So we just, again, went round and round. We need more research on this. We need more discussion and a way to find a better solution to this. We ran out of time without being able to come up with a solid recommendation other than some changes have to be made in that area. That's it.
Okay, curricula and methods. We had a very good group, and in fact, our recorder, Tom Benenson, was typing so fast that his laptop blacked out, but we got it back online. Pretty early on in the discussion, I'm going to have some prefatory remarks. The suggestion was made that the recommendation we should simply make was start over, and we were done. But we figured solving Bob's world hunger issue might have been easier. So we used start over as kind of an overarching theme. And in the end, even though we might not be starting over in that broader sense, what we ended up doing was taking a more pragmatic approach. I think you'll see in the 5 recommendations. We had consensus on all 5. But taking a pragmatic approach in that material may already exist, but we can start over in terms of how we present it, or how we make it available, and to whom we make it available. and do a better job in that regard. And so perhaps from that point of view, we could have a quicker impact on safety and the longevity of our customers in our business and student pilot retention. But other sub-themes also fall into this start over. If we're going to start over from a blank slate, a couple of the different things that we wanted to make sure that permeate our culture, and we've heard a little bit about culture throughout the couple of days, is that we need to have a sense in everything that we do of what's in it for me. The instructor needs to know what's in it for me. The customer needs to know what's in it for me. The flight school needs to know what's in it for me. And if we can clearly articulate why we do what we do on all the levels, well, then everybody's on the same page. And everybody understands why cockpit resource management is important, why go-around practice is important. And there's never any question, because it's inbred in the culture. Also, we want to have tailored curricula for students and instructors as part of the kind of a customizability of our curricula and methods. And so that we're not rigidly locking all flight instructors and all students into the same box. You know, if I'm an independent contractor out in the Midwest somewhere, and I get a student who just wants to fly locally light sport, why should they be treated like they're going to be an airline pilot? And vice versa. So there needs to be this idea that we can be flexible and customizable. Also, ethics and honesty have to permeate everything we do. We talked about that already. In doctrine, let's be upfront about what we're doing. Well, let's do the same thing with the customers, with our methodology, with our curricula as well. There was some talk about salesmanship 101, but we have to get away from the old model of aviation where it's done out of a passion or from the heart. Not saying that that cannot and should not and must not be a component, but we have to run aviation like a business. Business 101 has to permeate everything that we do. Marketing 101 has to permeate everything we do. Customer service has to permeate everything we do. And so these were some of the different themes that were, or assumptions I should say, that anything we talk about, perhaps in any of the other breakouts as well, but especially when we talk curricula and methodology, that underlying is that we understand, or that we have these concepts working for us at all the different levels. Also defined in our group were certain risks and or obstacles to the implementation of new curricula and methods. And I'll run through those as well. One of the glaring ones, or obvious ones, of course, would be the equipment that's available to us. We have a wide range of airplanes available to us in the fleet. And so there may be certain limitations in terms of being able to present or implement certain methodologies based on equipment. We certainly need manufacturer buy-in. If the manufacturer doesn't buy into what we're going to be doing on the curriculum and methods side, well, we're not going to be very effective. Standards and doctrine certainly need to align with the curricula and methods. And then, of course, what was identified, I think, as a common theme throughout here underlying all of this is that the instructor is the choke point, the instructor is the weak link, and that curricula and methodology don't matter at all. We can design the best widget or whatever we want to design, but if the flight school and the instructors can't, won't, or don't implement it, who cares? And hopefully that'll be something for the instructor group as well. And then, of course, the other risk or obstacle would be cost, which could be time and or money to implement. So these are some of the things that we discussed in our group, and that were underlying themes with anything we came up with. And as I said, we took a little bit more pragmatic approach. You won't see lots of long lead times on things that we have here. And it was also recognized that we do have the two components, and really when we start talking about scenario-based training or risk management, we're talking about the mental component as a accident prevention device. So it's what we think about and how we make decisions and how we react as the mental aspects, as a prevention to accidents. And then, of course, the ultimate end, the last thing that happens is some kind of loss of control, and that points to, of course, a physical and/or a stick and rudder skill. So we kind of view the stick and rudder a little bit as the recovery side of curriculum methodology. And so, along the road to reform, what we've proposed, and we have 5 recommendations here that had, like I said, consensus. They're not in any particular order, it's just top 5. So the first one is use scenario-based training for improved risk management for the students. And of course, when we say scenario-based training, we're also talking risk management and all of the other aspects that fall into that. Why? To make risk management a habit, to habituate this idea from lesson number 1, from day 1, from the time the customer walks into the flight school or interacts with the instructor. Who do we think might work on this? Of course, FAA standards and publications, the flight instructor organizations, be they the national ones or even there are regional ones as well. Master instructors, Air Safety Institute, AOPA. And when do we think we might work on something along this line? 6 months. Because a lot of this information is there. Again, that's not the new part. That's not the start over. The start over is, or the do over is, how do we get this information to the people who need it? How do we bring these resources to bear so that it's not disjointed, so that it's available in one place or a couple of places and all makes sense and is consistent? The other aspect that grew out when we talked about curricula and methodology is that a lot of times there are really 2 parallel tracks. There's the track that applies to the customer, in other words, how we deliver it to the customer, but there's also the track that applies to how we teach the instructor. How does the instructor learn to deliver the information, to deliver the methodology? And so we'll see that even with our second one. We thought it was important enough to keep it in the top 5, but provide it as separate from the other one we just talked about, which is the student side or the client side. Provide instructor training on risk management. And why? Well, everything starts with the instructor. And again, if the instructor exudes an air of risk management and scenario-based training and situational awareness, the students will pick that up. It's a matter of course. We all know in here that if the instructor has fear, what is the student going to have? More fear, right? And so now we have a Xerox copy of a Xerox copy until pretty soon it's a blank sheet of paper. We don't have any idea where it came from. Who we think should work on this? Same thing, FAA standards and publications, flight instructor organizations, master instructors, AOPA Air Safety Institute. 6 months. Again, the information is there. We have to package it, repackage it, get it to the people who need it. Third one, emphasize load factor and angle of attack training. Why? Because accidents don't happen configured for a check ride stall. The last thing most pilots see before they die was a stall spin out of a turn, a stall spin out of a maneuver. We can do better. And the fact that this is recurring, this is something, again, this information is there, but we think it needs to be an emphasis area and get away from this idea of speed and angle attack and speed and stall and the slow speed phobia that John King was talking about yesterday. Who works on this? Air Safety Institute, courseware providers, the flight instructor organizations, as soon as possible. Maybe even an advisory circular that brings this all together as soon as possible. This can have a nice impact on safety and also on our ability to have long-term participants because they're getting better information, broader information, and information that really applies to where the accidents are occurring. I think this is what, number 4 now. Implement continuing professional education for flight instructors. CPE. Of course, the Master Instructor Program is a step along that direction. Why? Instructors lead by example. Again, they are the choke point. They're the beginning and the end as far as customer interaction. And we are all products of our instructors, are we not? And so, if the students see the instructors doing continuing education, it breeds in this culture again that training is good. It's not something, oh, every 24 months we got to do this. No, it creates the need for training. Not the requirement, but the need, because the students emulate their instructors. And by having the instructors engaged in their own education, they might become better teachers. Who? Well, SAFE, NAFI, of course, Master Instructor Program, course providers, pilot workshops, webinars, aircraft manufacturers. We have the CPCs, we have the CSIPs as well. When? A year. Let's get this done in a year. And our last one, create guidance for the use of simulation and provide credit. That's the incentive here. Provide credit for the use of simulators. Why? Because oftentimes simulators are a much better teaching tool. Remember, the cockpit is a lousy classroom. In the simulator, we can test to a higher level of learning oftentimes. Not just the rote level, but application, correlation. We can pause and discuss. So let's make use of this technology, becoming more and more affordable, more and more available to us, and let's create the guidance and provide the credit. Simulator manufacturers involved in this, of course, FAA, curriculum providers, organizations that can provide input and feedback in terms of helping to develop methodologies for this, SAFE, NAFI, AOPA, the universities, because they're already using simulators. Let's get their feedback. But again, we don't want to get to the point where we are rigid, but maybe there are aspects here that could also apply to an independent contractor in the Midwest operating a single airplane. So it has to be easily customizable, you know, not just a rigid curricular, rigid methodology, but it has that built into it. And we think this can be done immediately, right now. What are we waiting for? Information's out there. So let's get it done. And so, again, we try to be a little bit more pragmatic. There's nothing that is dramatic here, I don't think, or far-reaching. The idea was to get us moving, to get some momentum going, have an impact early, and then we can move to broader issues in terms of curricula and methodology. But I think it satisfies two of the goals of the symposium, and that is safety and retention, and creating long-term members in our community and better educated members of our community as well. All right, so now it's up to the aviation education, and thank you very much.
My name's Mike Gaffney again, and I had the pleasure of being the facilitator for this team. It was a very spirited team at that, as you probably gathered. We had a couple of charges that we started off with, and we tried to take them from a holistic approach. But the questions that we were asked to consider were entry-level professional accreditation system. Essentially what happens right now is we create a CFI, they come out of the chute, they go into the system, and they're basically left to the devices of whatever system they go into, as to how they'll be indoctrinated, how they'll be standardized, how they'll be trained, and how they'll be deployed. And there is very little standardization other than the 141 system or the 142 system. If the flight instructor goes off to a Part 61 school, there's very little support, and so what he's going to do is either emulate the instructor that taught him, or he's going to emulate the people around him, which may or may not be the type of folks that we want to be setting the example for that new flight instructor. A couple other ones. The reason for the high failure rate on the initial flight instructor initial practical tests, where we looked at that, and we've got a couple of ideas there. How should teachers be teaching higher order pilot skills? That was the one that Max Trescott was going to address yesterday, and because he was ill, he wasn't able to be here. I tried to handle that as well as Mossy did, and a few of our teammates. What's wrong with the current process for training, certificating flight instructors? And so we've got a couple of categories. We grouped these things in to make sure we were able to address each and every one of these. What might be the best approach to encourage the continuing education of flight instructors? So what can we do as a system to support the people that are already out there? We've already got 93,000 some odd flight instructors that have already made it through the gate. So what are we going to do to support them? So we have to address it from two perspectives. We have to first address the new flight instructors that are coming up to the gate to make sure that we're using the right set of standards for evaluating them, for preparing them, for evaluating them, and then getting them into the system to make sure that they're following the things that we as a consensus team believe are the best practices. Second thing is we need to be able to go out and figure out how do you support the instructors that are already in the system. Right now, our only touch points, we have two essentially touch points. One is through the FERC system, when they come in to renew their CFI, whatever method they use, and there's like 11 different methods to renew a CFI. And the other one is going to be the flight review system. And so we try to address that as well. And what are the common flight instructor issues that deter students from learning, and how can those be addressed? Well, when you look at how flight instructors do their job and how they've been prepared to do their job, sometimes it's their own approach to training that is the thing that's deterring the learning. And so what we have to do is we have to re-look at that. So we came up with 5 ideas. Let's go ahead and review a couple of those. First of all, in the North Florida FSDO, there exists a program right now, and I believe it's other places around the country, but how it's being deployed is spotty. But what North Florida FSDO did is they established a program called the CFI Special Emphasis Program. It's on a very specific day, last Wednesday of the month, and it's at FSDO, and it's taught by industry special matter experts, DPEs, people that are recognized in particular areas, and it covers 8 major emphasis areas of the CFI program. So what they've done is they've come up with the areas that are most commonly missed on the CFI certification process within the North Florida FSDO. So what the idea was within our group was you take that program, right now it's kind of being handled somewhere between flight standards and the FAST team, depending on who's doing the offering of that program. And so what we're thinking is let's enhance that. Let's do it a joint program between the FAA and the industry. And so we go out to the flight instructors and attach that as some kind of a credit-based system that allows instructors to get their renewals done, gives them credit towards renewal, but you also focus it towards the new flight instructors that are coming through the system. So you cover the things like building plans of actions, building syllabi, using that syllabi, using technology, customer service, all of those things that the other panels touched on. This special emphasis program could be a way to do that, and I think it's a great opportunity for SAFE and NAFI and a number of the other consortium candidates that are out there in the industry to work together with flight standards to roll out a program like this. We believe that we could increase the quality control of the applicants, because what you're doing is you're going to be taking those flight instructor ground school courses, the FOI preparation courses, perhaps at the universities, at the 141s, at the various schools, and then offer these particular programs so that the instructor teaching that course could say, class, I think instead of having class here today, why don't we go up to the FSDO? Let's go up and listen to these experts talking on these particular areas as a way to expand the breadth of material that's being delivered to these folks. So it's a proactive approach. Clicker. The second one, establish a mentoring program for instructors that is going to be centralized within regions. So what we do right now is that we treat flight instructors essentially as flight instructors. We give them some special respect for being a double I or an MEI, or or they may have a master, or they may be a national CFI of the year, or they may have written a book, or they may have done something. But as a holistic system for flight training, we don't do anything to propagate that out and regionalize it so that other instructors can come to that person for support. So one of the things that we know for sure is that none of us know everything there is to know about flying. So if we're learning to fly in Florida, we know very little about flying in the mountains. If we fly, in the southern part of the country, we may know little about how working in a heavy density terminal may be. All right, so if we can try to figure out a way to centralize and regionalize people's expertise, especially those that are recognized either regionally or nationally for something that they're good at, and then use that as a mentoring program, we believe that would be very effective in shoring up the new flight instructors coming through the system, plus also providing resources for the existing instructors that are already out there in the system to be able to go to these regional experts. One of the charges we were given was to take a look at the 6156, the flight review, and look at the materials that's available and how we're actually employing the materials to conduct the flight review. And there was a lot of discussion around this particular area, and there's a couple of very good documents that are out there. The Guide to Conducting an Effective Flight Review, and I believe that there is a companion document to that, the Guide to Receiving. Arlen, help me with the name of that document. You recall the
It's an online course.
Okay.
For what FAA safety? It's basically the guide to the flight review.
The Guide to the Flight Review.
Which is the pilot's end.
Okay.
This is the flight instructor's side.
And there was also some discussion that there's a new one coming out for the instrument proficiency check, a similar type of documents. And so one of the things that we see is that there are resources that are out there in various places that all of the flight instructors in the system aren't aware that they're there, nor do they know to go and get those things because they're tools that will be useful to them. So what we have to do as a charge coming out of this symposium is to try to centralize somehow or propagate out the various materials that are already out there in the system and get them into the hands of the people who need them in order to be able to conduct the flight review and the instrument proficiency checks and the other things. Those are our opportunity. Those are our touch points where we're going to actually be able to contact the existing flight instructors that are out there. And there was a number of other ideas related to these things that were covered in this thing, but we don't have time to discuss here. But the idea was one of the suggestions, and Arlen had a lot of energy behind this one, was to there's a lot of very good sources of information. If we can come up with a top 10 picks and incorporate those top 10 picks of resources and documents and websites and white papers and whatever it is, and provide that to all the schools and make sure everyone knows where to get these things, to make sure that they're in this library, and then start incorporating the use of those things into the various opportunities, the touch points we have with both students and instructors on an ongoing basis. This particular what we did is we ended up, when we did brainstorming, we had about 35 ideas that we started with. And so we went through a process of trying to refine those down. Refined them down into groups. And this group here, that's why I have gatekeeping, is that what we mean by gatekeeping is controlling the flow of the new folks that are being applying to become flight instructors, to make sure that they're being prepared in the right way and being tested in the right manner, to make sure that we don't add to the 93,000 with more people that for a whole variety of reasons are not meeting the standard that we as a group believe that they should. So in this particular one, there was a couple of designated pilot examiners in there, Alan Engelhart and Jeff Edwards and several others in that room, that felt very passionate that the DPE is one of those places where the rubber meets the road. That's where, if we could create a vehicle for flight instruction renewal that would be DPE based, so not necessarily going off and doing a renewal based upon a check ride, but doing it similar to the way a FERC works, but it would be a one-on-one opportunity. So the flight instructor looking for renewal meets one-on-one with the pilot examiner, the DPE, and it takes X number of hours, and it has a plan of action, and it has a syllabus, and it has perhaps some kind of a 141 look and feel to it, so that there's a graduation certificate issued, so that you have a vehicle under which to the authority to conduct the renewal. And so that we had a lot of discussion on that in terms of using the DPEs as the gatekeeper, but also as the renewal opportunity to bring best practices and discussion. One of the other things that I don't think made it on here, but we had a discussion that was very important, is that we should have a feedback mechanism that goes directly from the DPE back to the flight instructor, the recommending flight instructor. Some kind of a report, some kind of an acknowledgement, some kind of a thing that explains how the thing went. Okay, how did this check ride? How well was this person prepared? I don't know what it would look like, how it would happen, who would pay for it, how long it would take, but the feeling is that sometimes there isn't that direct feedback loop that needs to go back to the flight instructor. So the flight instructor needs to be rewarded when they do a good job of preparing someone for a check ride, and they need to somehow have some remedial coaching or mentoring when they send somebody that doesn't do so well. So those things kind of fell into the gatekeeping category. This particular one here had to do with the PTS, and some of the recommendations that you've seen here today kind of dovetail and kind of cross over, but that's really okay. In this particular one here, we felt new guidance and PTS revisions, which would require initial CFI candidates to develop a plan of action and demonstrate the use of a syllabus on the initial CFI check ride. So what we're really advocating here is a revision of the PTS or a supplement to this to the PTS, requiring the initial candidates to present their syllabus, present their plan of action, and demonstrate its use, incorporating things such as scenario-based training and some of these other areas that are somehow making it under the radar for new CFI renewals. So there's the support for both Part 61 and 141 flight instructors has got to be addressed. So we know that 141 flight instructors already use a syllabus. And so what I would suggest in this particular area is that you wouldn't allow a 141 candidate to come in and just bring in some boilerplate that they brought in from the school and then just basically say, well here it is. So we would want a higher order demonstration of the understanding and the usage of that particular document, the plan of action and the syllabus. And that concludes our 5 recommendations.